If you're a post-transplant patient, have you really considered going back to work? If so, have you really counted the cost? I hope that you'll stay tuned today. I've gone through all the things that you've given me, all the feedback you've been giving me over the weekend from this subject. I've compiled it into a list, and I'm going to give you 10 things you ought to consider today to try to help to decide if you should go back to work. Stay tuned, and we'll talk about all of them. Well, hey folks, once again, I appreciate you being with us today on the Transplant Helper podcast / YouTube video series. I'm really excited about today's program, and that's because we based today's program on a very simple question, and that is, can I return to work post-transplant? Now, we spent all weekend putting that question out, posing that question to you on social media as well as on this YouTube channel. I posted a video back on the other night, I think it was Friday night late, where I asked that question of you. Could you go back to work? Is it possible? Do you feel like you could go back to work as a post-transplant patient? I knew ahead of time that there will be varying opinions concerning that, depending on your age, depending on how good your recovery was, depending on all sorts of factors, what your job used to be, whether it was very stringent or not. Everything rolled up and put back together. There are a lot of reasons why one would choose to go back to work or not to go back to work. So I've taken all of that, the feedback that you gave me, and by the way, thank you so much for that feedback from coming in underneath the videos there on YouTube, a lot of it coming in through Twitter. You commented on my Twitter handle, and then some of you even emailed me at that email address I gave out, jim@thetransplanthelper.com, and you're free to email me at that email address anytime that you'd like to have a lengthier discussion. I'm more than happy to answer you back. So put something in the subject line so I'll know that it's a real person, but I'm happy to talk to you in that way. Any way that I can help, I'm here for you. But today's discussion, that of, are you ready, or can you go back to work after transplant, post-transplant? And again, knowing that's different for everyone, let me give you a couple of pieces of advice before we get into the meat of what we're going to talk about today. Number one, if you decide to go back to work at any point post-transplant, make sure it is your decision. Let me say that again. Make sure it is your decision to go back. I understand some people, they get burdened down by bills and by the need of going back to work, but they fail to know if it is really their decision. Maybe their spouses, maybe their children, maybe their parents, I don't know the situation, have kind of ever so slightly push them or at least encourage them to go back to work, maybe just for the money, or maybe just for some benefits, or maybe for this or for that, maybe to get them out of the house. They think they've been in the house too long post-transplant. They need to get out and do something. Various reasons why people go back to work after transplant, sometimes a little and a combination of a lot. But make sure it's your decision. Number two, when you're making that choice, make sure it's your choice, but make sure you allow others, such as your transplant team, help you with that choice. They're going to give you the best advice as far as how far along you are in the transplant recovery process and when and if it is a good time to try to return to work. They're going to advise you better on that than anyone else, because they've seen so many patients like you and so many patients in a similar situation, and they may know someone who has left the same profession that you left out of and wanting to go back to the same profession you want to go back to or go toward, and they can really weigh in and give you a lot of good information and advice if you need to know about going back to work in those situations. But add your family to that. Keep in mind those spouses, those brothers and sisters, and constituents, friends, caregivers particularly mean a lot. Ask them what their advice is in this, and let them weigh in. Let what they say mean something, because again, they've probably spent quite a bit of time around you, and they may be noticing some things about you that prove that you're not quite ready. And we may mention some of that in a few moments. But, just let them weigh in. Let them weigh in on their opinion. They may just be selfish and they may just be afraid, but at least talk with them. Let them help you with that decision. So with that said, making sure that you make it your choice, but basing that choice upon the discussions, the information that you've gathered from your transplant team, as well as closer family members, people who you trust, who you think can help and make that decision. So it's your choice, whatever we discuss today. Now, let me say, in addition to that, I received all of that feedback from you from the YouTube comment section down below the previous video I put out, the teaser, through emails, through Twitter. Received all these comments, and I'm not going to try to cover each comment per se as to read the comment and address it. I'm not going to go about it that way. I've prepared these 10 things, the 10 things you need to consider before going back to work. That's what I'll call it. And I'm going to stick by them. However, I'll say this, these 10 things have been developed and even some of them changed because of what you said. And when I get to some of those, I will mention some specific situations, comments that I got that help with that. But I just don't want you to know I'm going to stick with these 10 things, kind of keep things going, albeit I'll admit this will be probably 30-minute programs. So just if you plan on watching it all, fine. If you need to pause in the middle and go do something else, fine. But come back, keep watching the video, and I promise I will help you out with this. Let's jump right in, though. How about that? In talking about 10 things you need to consider or ask yourself before going back to work, here's the first question. I'm going to be looking at my little screen here to get them because I don't want to get out of order. But number one, can you keep all of your appointments? Can you keep all of your appointments? You see, your appointments, especially inside of the first year or so, are extremely important. They don't need to be missed. You don't need to be skipping appointments and rearranging appointments and trying to change appointments to later dates or earlier dates. Those doctors need good information and the time frame in which they need it. And I'm going to hold together or tape a whole nother program on another day where I try to help you to understand, you don't just decide, okay, I've got an appointment Friday, but I think I'm going to call and reschedule that. And you call to reschedule and the doctor says, well, we can't see you the following Monday, but we can see you 3 Mondays from now. You can't accept that. That'll be too late. If there's some medications they were trying to monitor, some blood work they were trying to be careful with, a procedure maybe that needed to be done, you probably didn't need to wait that long. You're better off going to that original appointment and letting them make the best decision. Again, we'll take an entire program later to talk about that and explain that. But question, can you keep all your medications or appointments on time every time? Can you do that and be employed? It's difficult to do. Not every employer is set up to let you leave your job on a regular basis sometimes, and even on a moment's notice sometimes. Inside of the first year of transplant, you may have to go to the doctor a dozen times. That's a lot of times to be in and out of the doctor, especially our type of appointments, which are all day long appointments to the clinic, going to all sorts of testing portions of the clinic, being gone all day, maybe even being gone overnight. Can you keep up with that? Number two, how about, can you take care or take all of your medications on time every time? Can you take all of your medications on time every time? It's more difficult, believe it or not, to keep up with and to take your medications on time every time and accurately in a workplace, which is an environment that you do not totally control, than it was and is, say, inside of your home. In your home, you've got your medication stored in a safe place, surely, but in a convenient place at the same time. You know where it is. You know it's grouped together. You know how it's grouped together. You know how it's stored, how accessible it is. Probably everyone in your home knows where that medication is and can access it. And certain of those caregivers that are with you can even dole that medicine out or prepare it or bring you certain kinds just because you said, hey, go get my Prograf, go get my Forte, go get my whatever it is. They can probably help you with that, right? Not in the workplace. In the workplace, and I'm just giving you an example like where I used to work. I used to work in a cabinet mill, a manufacturing mill. And anything like that that would have been brought in the building would have had to be taken into a back room and locked inside of a locker and then locked inside of a cage. You see, my medication wasn't to be with me on the job. I wasn't to have access just to reach in a bag and pop a pill, just to take my medicine anytime I wanted. No, it would have had to been at that point in time, had to find a time when I had a break, when I could actually break away from my job, which was a production job, machines running, the next machine depending on my work. I would have had to break away, go back, get someone to let me in the cage, then get into my locker, get the medication, then go and get something to drink, probably from the other end of the building, put those two things together, take the medication, return my bag back to the locker room, back into the locker, back behind the cage, come back to work, and by now I've lost minutes, maybe 15 minutes. Well, guess what? Early times of transplant, if I were to do that, I may have had to do that 3 or 4 times during the work hours, during a work hour day. Don't know if that would have been possible. And what are the options? Either I don't take them, or I take them. I end up taking them late because I couldn't break away. I couldn't get finished with what I was on. You see the point. Can you take all of your medications on time every time? Number 3. Can you maintain your diet and exercise routine? Can you maintain your diet and exercise routine? That's a real question. You know, if I'm at home, I have access. I can go right down to the other end of the house and get a hold of my refrigerator and my pantry and open some doors and have access to some fairly healthy food choices. Now, I'll admit I can stir something up with chicken and this and that, and I could make it unhealthy, but I could nevertheless take a pack of chicken and a head of lettuce and some tomatoes, and I could make a grilled chicken, if you will, or baked chicken salad, and that'd be great. Tastes good, be healthy for me. Put a little this and that on top, be fine. But you see, in the workplace, that I can remember back, that's not what I ate. I usually carried a sandwich, maybe ham and cheese and turkey, and it stacked up this high with all sorts of mayonnaise and mustard and whatever else could make it taste good, put on it. And I could remember eating that, and that not being enough, so I'd end up eating about a bag of chips every day and, you know, whatever. Or I'd eat the leftovers where I brought chili or something with me, and just never ate really good quality meals. No more times than not, I got bored with that type food. I ended up getting in the car, driving down the road about 4 or 5 miles, and there were 7 or 8 fast food restaurants I could choose from down there. I ate fast food nearly every day. That wouldn't be good post-transplant. Would be way off of my diet post-transplant. So I couldn't keep that diet, right? What about exercise? Now, just comparing my old job to whatever your old job is, I do not know, but a lot of people in their jobs, maybe if they're in a mill, they stand in one place like I did. They stood in one place all day, every day, running a machine or monitoring a machine, watching things happen. Not a whole lot of walking, not a whole lot of exercise, really just standing in one place. Don't need to do that as a transplant patient. Now, even standing in one place, by the time I worked back then, my 60, 70, 65-hour work week, all of those hours, by the time I worked that, too tired when I got home, go home, lay down on the couch, later move to the bed after supper. That was my life. Wouldn't get enough exercise either. You got to think about that. You got to consider that. Question, can I maintain my diet and or exercise if I return to work? Next, we're looking now at number 4. Can I avoid most illnesses if I return to work? Now, keep in mind, especially inside of the first 3 months, and I think even up to the first year or better, we need to be overly cautious with trying to keep away from viral infections and bacteria infections and all the sorts. You know, the flus, the colds, the viruses. We need to be staying away from that, because for us it can be detrimental to our health or even deadly if we catch the smallest of things. Well, you also know as well as I do, when you go into a workplace, especially one that employs any number of people, I would say above two. Mine, in my case, my old workplace, cabinet industry, employed about 300 at the time. A large number of those, I would say probably 250 of the 300, came to work, more times than not, came to work when they were sick. They couldn't afford to stay home. They weren't financially established enough to stay home, so they came to work sick. So the man working next to me might have had the flu. The one on the other side might have had bronchitis. The one across me might have had walking pneumonia. The one behind me his whole family might have had the stomach virus the night before, and it was all he could do to drag himself in from the car to stand by his machine, and maybe that's why he passed by me 8 or 10 times, headed toward the barrel out back. I don't know. But can you go into that workplace and feel pretty sure, or can you avoid most illnesses? You need to answer that question before returning to work. Next, which is number 5, can you avoid most stress? Can you avoid most stress? You see, stress is terrible. It's terrible on our bodies from top to bottom. Of course, you may assume, well, if you are a heart transplant patient, you certainly don't need to cause yourself to have another heart attack. Well, stress is not good on any part of our body. Being overly stressed. Now, I understand, and we actually got a tweet, and I got a contact, and this is where I go back to some of my feedback from someone who said, being unable to work really put a lot of stress on him, even brought him to the point of depression. And I understand that. I've lived that. We're going to talk about depression, anxiety, stress that comes along with transplant. We're going to talk about that in an entirely different program, for a whole program. So I understand that. Not being able to work is stressful. But the question you need to ask yourself is going back to work going to increase that stress, or could it potentially increase that stress? You see, going back to my life, I was in supervision, higher level of supervision in that plant, and I was in charge of several hundred people at one point. The stress was high. The hours consisted of anywhere from 60, 70 hours a week, and the stress level was extremely high because I was responsible for so many employees, but more than that, so many employees in this direction and that. I had huge, hundreds of thousands square foot buildings, and I had departments here and over there, and I had to move from department to department and check on all of them. I know if I went back to that job, the stress would be too high. I know there was too much on me. At the time, I thought it was a challenge. At the time, I was younger. It felt good to accomplish things. I don't know how I lived then. I know I couldn't live that way now. Next. This is number 6, can you at this point in your life, feel confident you can keep up the pace? If you return today, tomorrow, next month, can you feel confident that you could keep up the pace? I didn't ask you if you felt good. If you're a transplant patient, you feel good in comparison to the way you used to feel, more than likely. You may feel great. Overall, I feel great. But I do not feel confident that I could keep up the pace, at least not of the job I've been describing. Now, I may go in there. They work usually 6 days a week. I may go in there 3, maybe 4 days a week and do fairly well if they work 10 hours or less. But when we would start hitting that 11, 12-hour mark every day and start hitting that 6th day of the week to work, even back then when I felt wonderful and wasn't having heart problems per se, I couldn't hardly keep up then. I know now that I can be fine all week and active all week and doing things all week, and then I have those days that I don't know when they're going to be, but I have those days where I'm no better than laying on the couch. Don't have the energy, can't do. And I scratch my head sometimes. I say, how in the world did I used to work 60, 70 hours a week in the difficult situations that I was in? How did I used to survive? I really don't know. I know if I had to do it right now, I couldn't. That's not to say there may not be something else out there for me, But that job, I couldn't work. So that was number 6. Number 7, can your employer be overly flexible? Can your employer be overly flexible? And keep in mind, they'd have to be. Because in the very first point we mentioned, can you keep all of your appointments? That may amount to, inside the first year, it may amount to a dozen or more appointments, scheduled appointments. And that employer would need to let you off for all of those appointments and not argue with, well, I can't really let you go to that one on Monday because you see we got all of this going on Monday. No, that's not anything that I can even negotiate. I've got to go Monday. I've got blood work that has to be checked that day. Cannot be checked the day before, cannot be checked the day after. Prograph, one of them, tacrolimus. I need to go on that day. Maybe you're on a blood thinner. You have to get that checked when it's time to check it. You got to be flexible. That's the appointments that are scheduled. There are going to be other appointments that pop up where he's got to be flexible because, hey, maybe you caught that cold sinus infection the guy next to you had at work. He wasn't even out. He seemed to work okay, but you are bedridden. You've got to go to the hospital for a few days. He's got to be flexible and say, okay, Jim is different. Sally, Sue, and John and Jack, they're different. They're transplant patients, and they won't be able to work. They won't be able to maintain. They're going to have a few days off. Are they going to be overly flexible? If not, working for them may not be the best idea. Number 8, can you return to work and continue to pay for your care? Now, it's sad that we even have to discuss this one, but in the day and time in which we live, doesn't matter if you're cheering for the Trump administration and the changes you think they're going to make or crying over it, makes no difference. It has nothing to do with anything really at this point, but can you return to work and continue to pay for your care? Understand that if you're where I am, everybody watching this video is not, but if you were where I am right now, I am basically retired. I've been on Social Security disability now for about since 2010, so about 7 years. So I have Medicare coverage. I also have, through my local transplant center, what's called charity care. So when Medicare pays $80, leaves the $20 for me, which $100,000 surgery, you do the math. I would have had a chunk left on me. Charity care picks up and pays those bills 100%. If I go back to work and make a measly amount of money that would barely keep food on my table, barely pay my bills, and lose my charity care, what will I be stuck with? Well, immediately I'd be stuck with that 20%. Now, I've seen bills come across my desk for the 20% that were $45,000, $50,000. Would you like that? I've got a bill for some IV medication I took called Milrinone, which we're going to talk about on a whole nother day. Milrinone for a heart transplant patient. I took post-transplant, a pre-transplant for 10 months, was costing me out of pocket almost $4,000 a month. By the time I stopped them from charging me, which was easy to do, and I'll tell you how to do that in another video, by the way, I owe them $15,000. But you see, the thing is, if they see a man who's out working, who has insurance in his workplace, they look at you and say, well, man, that guy's got money. He could pay. He could pay all this. What they don't know is, by the way, he can't. If he had a heart transplant surgery that cost $750,000, he's considered high risk, if not uninsurable, but at least high risk. His insurance deductible is going to be huge. The workplace may not even want to cover him because of the situation. And if he's left with a bill that is more than his, semi-annual or annual income, he's not ahead. Are you going to make enough money at your job to fork out what is for some of us $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 per month just for medications? to be able to walk into clinic for a standard, that is a standard heart transplant follow-up clinic visit that costs somewhere in the neighborhood of $3,800 to $4,200. Are you ready for that? You may have to be if you return to work and get on some insurance plan that's not prepared or ready for you. Do all your homework first. It's number 9. Can you see yourself being more fulfilled doing something else? I think when we think return to work, we probably think, well, if I used to work down at the mill, I got to go back to the mill. One man that gave me some feedback, I think via Twitter, won't reveal his name, but he's a friend of mine through Twitter. He said that he used to do drywall prior to his heart attack and stroke. I think he had both, but heart transplant eventually. Said he used to do drywall. Friends, I've done drywall before, not as a profession, but as a hobby around the house and help some other people with it. Very, very, very hard work to do. He's probably not going to go back to hanging drywall. He just won't do it. He won't go back to hanging drywall, period. As we say in the South, it ain't a-gonna happen. So if he wants to go back to work, he may have the choice not to. But if he desires to go back to work, then he may have to ask himself, are you so happy hanging drywall that's all you want to do? Or could you be more fulfilled doing something else? Could you be more fulfilled doing something else? And he may discover, you know what? I hung drywall for a long time. I don't think I can hang drywall anymore, but I have always wanted to be a blank. I've always wanted to be in the medical field. I'm not a medical doctor, you can tell, but I've always wanted to be in the medical field. Be a nurse, be some sort of technician, maybe take x-rays, do echoes, do EKG, something. Just have some interaction in the room with patients. I would love to do that. Maybe that's what I need to be doing. Waiting these few years out to see what's going to happen. Maybe that's what I need to be doing. Can you see yourself being more fulfilled by doing something else? Now, if nothing else is going to satisfy you and you're dead set and satisfied that you have to go back to work, then go back to your old job if you can handle it. So number 10, here's the most important one above all, the most important one, number 10. Can you keep your health as good? I'm sorry, let me say that again. Can you keep your health as your first priority? Can you keep your health as your first priority? Okay? Because if you cannot keep your health as your first on the top priority, don't try. Don't go back to work. Because if your health is not your first priority, we're going back up here. You won't keep your appointments. You won't take your medication. You won't maintain your diet. You'll catch everything that comes through. You'll be stressed beyond belief. You'll lose confidence and you'll never keep up the pace. Your employer, there won't be any worry about them being flexible. They'll probably fire you. You won't be able to pay for your care because you'll be so sick. The sky's the limit to the cost. If you're not keeping yourself, let me put it like this. Out of all the transplant doctors I have in the transplant heart failure the transplant group that I'm with at UAB Hospital, they're a transplant group. They treat stage 4 heart failure only. That's all they do. Stage 4 or transplants or LVADs. One of the doctors over there who I trust as much as any of them, she came to me one day and I asked her the question pre-transplant. I said, Doctor, what's the outcome here? What are the possibilities of me returning to work post-transplant? With the expectation I was going to do very well, and I have. I've done very, very well. She said, Mr. Merle, I'm not going to let you go back to work. I was kind of surprised. I've seen all the TV shows where someone has a transplant, they go back to work, the YouTube videos, you can find hundreds of them. They're very inspirational. I encourage you, after you finish this video, go find some of them. Very inspirational. People get their life back. She said, I'm not going to let you go back to work. She said, from this point on in your life, your new career is to keep yourself alive. Your new career is managing your own health. And in essence, she taught me the first 9 just by saying that. She said, you make it your number one priority and goal to keep your body in the best shape you can and to outlive everyone who's ever been transplanted. Now, she told me some secrets about the honest, the low down, the real, not what you hear on the street, not what you hear in a fairy tale book, the real time frames, the real averages. How long does a man with a heart live? How long was a man with the lungs live? How long was a person with a liver live? And the kidneys and the pancreas and on and on. She gave me those numbers. I'll share those with you another day, not on this program. And they slap you around. Average slaps you around. But she told me, if you'll make it your life, make it top priority, you'll outlive everybody you've ever heard of. And she said, I've sent people back to work before. I've sent a number of people back to work years ago. And she said, I watched almost every single one of them lose focus, start doing something wrong, neglecting something, whether it be their medication, whether it be their exercise, whether it be being around too many people who are sick. And she said, I saw them die. My patients died. And she said, I don't let my patients die. So she said, you never have to worry about me signing a paper either forcing you or even allowing you to go back to work. She said, if you want that, you'll get it from another doctor in the clinic, but I won't sign it. You see, my worry was that I'd get a transplant and then somehow Medicare or the government would force me to work. That's not even true. That's a myth. Medicare and the government, if that's what you're dealing with, most insurance companies, once you have a transplant, there's a 1-year window where you're completely in a box and you're safe, and they don't even review your case again for a year. So for a year, you're in a recovery case, and for a year, you're not bothered. For a year, the tab's on them, if you will. And then all they do is ask your doctor, how are they doing? The doctor says, well, they're doing pretty well, but I would not trust that they could go back to their old profession. I would not trust that he could go back to doing drywall. I wouldn't trust that he could go back to driving a truck. I wouldn't trust that she could go back to working in the mill. And then they say, okay, that's all we needed to know. Don't panic about it. Don't worry. But I want to encourage you, if you want to go back to work, go back to work. But be sure that before you do, you take consideration, careful, sober consideration of these questions. These 10 questions. There may be plenty more, and I'd like to hear about them in the show notes below, or commenting below, or over on Twitter at transplant_help, or at the email address jim@transplanthelper.com. I'd love to hear from you again. I enjoyed that feedback. Thank you for the feedback. But I think these 10 things are a good place to start, a really good place to start to consider if you're ready to go back to work. I thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a big old thumbs down. Like, share, subscribe to this channel, share it with your friends. And, this could account itself in a lot of situations, not just transplants. Someone is injured and needs to discover if they can go back to work. I think these 10 guidelines can help answer some of those questions. So share these things as far and wide as you can. Thank you so much for your dedication. I know so many of you watch all of these videos. I hope you're spreading the news, because in my mind, you're becoming a part of the Transplant Helper community. We're coming together. We're learning more about one another. Just continue to leave your comments below. I'd love to hear your stories still. if you've gone back to work, have you been successful? Did you give it a try and it didn't work? Or have you come to a point of saying, hey, my condition, I'm just not going to make it. I'm not going to be ready, but I'm going to find something to do in life, both to give me fulfillment and to help others. Sometimes we say paying it forward. Whatever the situation is, until we record next time, stay stronger, my friends.